Maybe you know what it feels like to be trapped inside your own body, to want to move forward but feel your chest tighten, your hands shake, your breath catch in your throat like you're drowning in open air. Maybe you've sat behind a steering wheel, engine running, keys in the ignition, and felt like the world was closing in around you. If that's you tonight, if fear has stolen something from you that you used to do without thinking, this story is for you. Because fear controlled my life. It took the wheel. It drove me into corners I never thought I'd hide in. But that night, in the pouring rain on a back road in Jackson, Mississippi, something changed. Faith spoke louder. Let me take you back to where it all started to break. It was a Tuesday evening, and the light at the corner of Capitol Street and West Street had just turned green. I was sitting there in my old Camry, hands wrapped so tight around the steering wheel, my knuckles had gone white. The air conditioning was blowing cold against my face, but sweat was dripping down the back of my neck. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Louder than the gospel station playing low on the radio, louder than the hum of traffic around me. The light was green, but I couldn't move. Behind me, someone honked. Just once, sharp and impatient. My whole body flinched like I'd been struck. My foot hovered over the gas pedal, trembling, and all I could think was, not again. Please, God, not again. Another honk, longer this time, angry. I whispered it out loud, my voice cracking in the empty car. Not again. And then, like a freight train, I couldn't stop. The memory hit me. It had been 2 years since the accident. 2 years since the night that changed everything. I still saw it in flashes, jagged, brutal pieces of a moment I couldn't forget no matter how hard I tried. The sound of screeching tires on wet asphalt, the way the headlights came out of nowhere, too fast, too bright, cutting through the rain like knives. The crunch of metal folding in on itself, the smell of burning rubber and gasoline, the scream that I didn't even realize was mine until it was cut off by the impact. And then, silence. That silence was the worst part. It wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that follows something being destroyed. The kind that makes you wonder if you're still alive, or if this is what dying feels like. I survived. Physically, at least. A concussion, 3 cracked ribs, a shattered wrist that took months to heal. But something else broke that night. Something the doctors couldn't see on an X-ray or stitch back together in an operating room. Something inside me splintered, and no matter how much time passed, I couldn't put it back together. Fear moved in, and it never left. The honking behind me grew louder, insistent. I could see the driver in my rearview mirror, a man in a white pickup, waving his hand in frustration. The light was still green. I knew I had to move. I knew it was safe. I knew there was nothing coming. But my body didn't believe it. My body remembered what my mind tried to forget. I forced my foot down on the gas pedal. The car lurched forward, slow and shaky, like it didn't trust me either. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely keep the wheel straight. I made it through the intersection, barely, and pulled into the parking lot of a closed gas station just a block down. I threw the car into park, turned off the engine, and sat there in the thick, humid silence of a Mississippi evening. My breath came in short, shallow gasps. My chest ached. I pressed my palms against my eyes and tried to steady myself. But the tears came anyway, hot and bitter and full of shame. I used to love driving. I used to roll the windows down and sing along to the radio, feel the wind in my hair, let the world blur past me like I was free. Now I couldn't even make it through a green light without feeling like I was going to die. What kind of life is this, I thought? What kind of person can't even drive to the grocery store without falling apart? Jackson, Mississippi, in the summertime, is a particular kind of heavy. The air sits on you like a wet blanket, thick with humidity and the smell of magnolia and cut grass. The cicadas hum their endless song from the trees, and the sky turns bruised shades of purple and gold as the sun sets. It's beautiful, in a slow, aching kind of way. But that night, sitting in that parking lot with my hands still shaking and my heart still racing, I couldn't see any of it. All I could see was the fear. I pulled out my phone and stared at the screen. My son's name sat at the top of my messages. Caleb. He was 12. He had a baseball game that night, his first game of the season. He'd been so excited that morning, practically bouncing off the walls as he packed his bag and laced up his cleats. "You're coming, right, Mom?" he'd asked, his face bright and hopeful. I'd smiled and nodded. "Of course, baby. I'll be there." But I wasn't. I couldn't make it. Not because I didn't want to, not because I didn't care, but because the field was 15 minutes away on Highway 80, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't get on that road. I couldn't drive that far. I couldn't breathe past the weight pressing down on my chest every time I even thought about it. So I sat in that parking lot instead, staring at my phone, feeling like the worst mother in the world. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for the sky to go dark. Long enough for the streetlights to flicker on, casting long orange shadows across the cracked pavement. Long enough to hear the distant sound of church bells ringing from the Baptist church down the street. Slow, steady, mournful. My phone buzzed. A text from my sister. "Did you make it to the game?" I stared at the message. My throat tightened. I didn't answer. Another buzz. This time from Caleb. "Where are you?" 3 words. Simple, innocent. But they cut deeper than any anger could have. I could picture him sitting on the bench, scanning the bleachers, looking for my face in the crowd, and not finding it. I typed out a response and deleted it. Typed again. Deleted again. What could I even say? How could I explain this to a 12-year-old boy who just wanted his mom to show up? How could I make him understand that I wasn't choosing to be this way? That I wasn't trying to let him down? That I was fighting a battle he couldn't see? I put the phone face down on the passenger seat and closed my eyes. And that's when I heard it. Faint. Almost like a whisper riding on the back of the humid breeze slipping through the cracked window. "You are not what happened to you." I opened my eyes, looked around. The parking lot was empty. The gas station was dark. There was no one there. But I'd heard it. I knew I had. I wiped my face with the back of my hand and started the car again. The engine turned over with a low rumble, and the gospel station came back on, soft and steady. A woman's voice singing something about grace, about mercy, about being found when you thought you were lost. I sat there for another moment, listening, letting the words wash over me like rain. Then I put the car in drive and pulled back onto Capitol Street. Slow, careful, hands still shaking, heart still pounding. But I was moving. I made it 3 blocks before I had to pull over again. 3 blocks before the fear came rushing back, louder and heavier than before. But it was 3 blocks more than I'd done in weeks. I turned off the car and leaned my head against the steering wheel. The rain started then. Light at first, just a few drops tapping against the windshield. Then heavier, harder, until it was pouring, drumming against the roof of the car like 1,000 tiny fists. And in the middle of that storm, in the middle of that fear, I whispered into the darkness, "Will I ever feel safe again?" Faith spoke louder. I drove home in the rain that night, taking the long way around, every back street and side road I could find to avoid Highway 80. What should have been a 10-minute drive took nearly 40. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my hands were cramped from gripping the wheel, and my shirt was damp with sweat despite the air conditioning running full blast. The house was dark except for the porch light my sister must have left on for me. She'd picked up Caleb from the game. I'd texted her from the parking lot some excuse about feeling sick, and she hadn't asked questions. She knew. She'd known for months what I was going through, even when I tried to hide it. I sat in the car for a long time after I turned off the engine. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, tapping softly against the windshield like it was trying to tell me something. Through the front window of the house, I could see the faint glow of the television in the living room. Caleb was still awake. I wanted to go inside. I wanted to hug him and tell him I was sorry. But I couldn't move. Because moving meant facing him. It meant looking into those 12-year-old eyes and seeing the disappointment I knew would be there. So I sat, and I cried. The kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and broken. The kind that shakes your whole body and leaves you hollow. When I finally walked through the front door, Caleb was sitting on the couch in his baseball uniform, still dirty from the game. His cleats were by the door, caked with red Mississippi clay. He looked up when he heard me come in, and for a second, his face brightened. "Mom." Then he stopped. He saw my face, saw the redness around my eyes, the way I was holding myself together by a thread. His expression shifted, not to anger, but to something worse. Concern, like he was the parent and I was the child who needed taking care of. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. I nodded too quickly, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my face in half. "Yeah, baby, I'm fine. I wasn't feeling well. I'm so sorry I missed your game." "How did it go?" He looked down at his hands. "We won. I got a double." Pride and shame crashed into each other in my chest. "That's amazing, Caleb. I'm so proud of you." "It's okay, Mom," he said, and the kindness in his voice broke me all over again. "I know you didn't feel good, but it wasn't okay. And we both knew it." My sister, Marianne, came out of the kitchen wiping her hands on a dish towel. She looked at me the way she'd been looking at me for 2 years, with a mixture of love and helplessness. Like she wanted to fix me, but didn't know how. "You want some tea?" she asked. I shook my head. "I'm just going to go to bed." She nodded, but I could see the worry in her eyes. "Claire, we need to talk about this. You can't keep—" "Not tonight, Marianne." My voice came out sharper than I meant it to. "Please, not tonight." She pressed her lips together and nodded. Caleb was watching us both, his eyes darting between us like he was trying to solve a puzzle he didn't have all the pieces to. I kissed the top of his head and whispered, "I love you, sweetheart. I'm sorry." "I love you too, Mom." I walked down the hallway to my bedroom and closed the door behind me. The room was quiet, except for the hum of the ceiling fan and the distant sound of rain still falling outside. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall, my mind replaying the same thoughts over and over like a broken record. What kind of mother misses her son's first game of the season? What kind of person can't even drive 15 minutes down the road? When did I become this? I thought about the woman I used to be. The one who drove Caleb to school every morning singing off key to the radio. The one who took road trips on a whim, windows down, chasing sunsets across state lines. The one who wasn't afraid of green lights or highways or the sound of rain on pavement. That woman felt like a stranger now, like someone I used to know a long time ago, in another life. The accident hadn't just taken my courage. It had taken pieces of me I didn't know how to get back. And every day that passed, every moment I let fear make my decisions, I felt myself disappearing a little more. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through old photos. There was one from 3 years ago. Caleb and me at the state fair, both of us grinning, covered in powdered sugar from funnel cake. I'd driven us there. It was an hour away, and I'd done it without thinking twice. Now I couldn't make it 15 minutes. I set the phone down and buried my face in my hands. That night, sleep didn't come easy. When it finally did, the dreams came with it. The same ones I'd been having for 2 years. The headlights, the impact, the sound of glass shattering, the scream. I woke up at 3 a.m, drenched in sweat, my heart hammering in my chest. The house was silent. The rain had stopped. I sat up and stared at the shadows on the ceiling, trying to remember how to breathe. "You are not what happened to you." The whisper came back, softer this time, almost like a memory. I didn't know where it came from or what it meant, but it was the only thing that felt real in that moment. I got out of bed and walked to the window. Outside, the street was empty and wet, reflecting the glow of the street lights. Jackson at night has a particular stillness to it, the kind that makes you feel like you're the only person awake in the world. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass and closed my eyes. "I don't know how to do this," I whispered into the darkness. "I don't know how to be brave again." The silence that followed felt heavy, final, like even God had stopped listening. The next morning, I drove Caleb to school, or I tried to. We made it 2 blocks before I had to pull over, hands shaking, chest tight, breath coming in short gasps. Caleb didn't say anything. He just sat in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead, his backpack in his lap. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, baby." "It's okay, Mom." He said it automatically, like a script he'd memorized, but I could hear the resignation in his voice, the understanding that this was just how things were now. I called Mary Ann. She came and picked him up, and I watched from the side of the road as my sister drove my son to school because I couldn't. I watched until the car disappeared around the corner, and then I sat there alone, crying into my hands, feeling like the biggest failure in the world. Later that afternoon, I found myself at the baseball field. I didn't plan to go there. I just drove, if you could call it driving, the way I crept along at 20 miles an hour, pulling over every few minutes to catch my breath. But somehow, I ended up there. The field was empty. Practice wouldn't start for another hour. I parked in the lot and sat there with the windows down, listening to the sound of the wind moving through the tall pines that lined the outfield. The smell of cut grass and clay filled the car. And for a moment, I could almost imagine what it must have been like the night before. The crack of the bat, the cheers from the bleachers, my son rounding second base with that huge grin on his face. And I wasn't there to see it. I got out of the car and walked to the bleachers. Sat down on the second row, right where I would have sat if I'd made it. From here, I could see everything. Home plate, the dugout, the scoreboard. I could hear the faint echo of voices and laughter from memory, like ghosts of a moment I'd missed. And that's when I broke. Not the quiet, private kind of breaking, the loud, ugly kind. The kind where you stop trying to hold it together and just let it all come crashing down. I sobbed into my hands, shoulders shaking, chest heaving, and I didn't care if anyone saw or heard me. Because the truth was, I was drowning, and I didn't know how to come up for air. He deserves a mother who isn't afraid, I said out loud, my voice raw and broken. He deserves better than this, better than me. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves, carrying the smell of rain that hadn't fallen yet. And in that wind, in that stillness, I heard it again. You are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to become. I lifted my head, tears still streaming down my face, and looked out at the empty field. The sun was starting to break through the clouds, casting long golden rays across the grass. It was beautiful, painfully beautiful. But I didn't feel beautiful. I felt broken, and I didn't know if broken things could ever be made whole again. I sat there until the first parents started arriving for practice. Then I got back in my car and drove home. Slow, shaky. But I drove. When I pulled into my driveway and turned off the engine, I sat there in the silence and whispered a prayer I wasn't even sure I believed anymore. God, if you're listening, I need help, because I can't do this alone. The silence that followed felt different this time. Not empty, just waiting. That night, I tucked Caleb into bed the way I used to when he was little. He was almost too old for it now, but he let me anyway. I sat on the edge of his bed and brushed the hair back from his forehead. I'm proud of you, you know, I said softly, for that double, and for being so patient with me. He looked up at me with those big brown eyes, so full of understanding it hurt. It's okay, Mom. I know you're trying. Trying. Was I? Or was I just surviving? I kissed his forehead and turned off the light. I love you, Caleb. Love you too. I closed the door and stood in the hallway, my hand still on the doorknob, and let the tears come again. Because trying wasn't enough. Surviving wasn't enough. I needed to live again, but I didn't know how. The days that followed felt like wading through water. Everything was slow, heavy. Each morning, I'd wake up with the same weight on my chest, the same question echoing in my mind. How long can I keep living like this? But something had shifted. It was small, so small I almost missed it. But it was there. That prayer I'd whispered in the driveway, that desperate plea for help. It had cracked something open inside me. Not hope, exactly. Not yet. But maybe the first whisper of possibility. The faint idea that maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to stay trapped in this fear forever. It started with the driveway. 3 days after I'd sat on those empty bleachers crying my heart out, I woke up before dawn. The house was still dark, The only sound, the gentle hum of the ceiling fan in my room, and the first bird starting to sing outside. I lay there for a moment, staring at the shadows on the ceiling, and I felt it again. That whisper, that gentle pull. Go a little farther today. I didn't know where it came from. It didn't feel like my own thought. It felt softer than that. Kinder, like someone was sitting beside me in the darkness, speaking words I couldn't hear but somehow understood. I got out of bed, pulled on a pair of jeans and an old Mississippi State sweatshirt, and walked outside. The morning air was cool and damp, that particular kind of stillness that only exists in the hour before sunrise. The sky was just beginning to lighten, deep purple fading to soft pink at the edges. The cicadas hadn't started their symphony yet. It was just me and the quiet. I stood at the edge of my driveway and looked at my car. It sat there in the darkness like a challenge, like a test I wasn't sure I was ready to take. But I walked to it anyway, opened the door, slid into the driver's seat. My hands found the steering wheel like they remembered something I'd forgotten. I wrapped my fingers around it, not tight this time, not white-knuckled with fear, but just holding it, feeling the worn leather under my palms. The same steering wheel I'd gripped 1,000 times before the accident. The same wheel that used to feel like freedom. I didn't turn on the engine, not yet. I just sat there, breathing, in and out, slow and steady, watching the sky lighten through the windshield. Okay, I whispered to myself, to God, to whoever was listening. Just to the end of the block. That's all. Just to the mailbox and back. I turned the key. The engine rumbled to life, and my heart immediately started racing. But I didn't turn it off. I put my foot on the brake, shifted into reverse, and slowly, so slowly, backed out of the driveway. The street was empty at that hour. Most of Jackson was still asleep. The streetlights were still on, casting long orange pools across the pavement. I could see Mrs. Henderson's porch light 3 houses down, and the Johnson sprinkler system just starting to sputter to life in their front yard. Normal. Everything was normal. I put the car in drive and pressed gently on the gas. The car moved forward. 10 miles an hour. 15. My knuckles weren't white this time, but my hands were still shaking. My breath was coming fast and shallow, but I was breathing. The mailbox at the end of the block was my finish line. I could see it in the distance, just a blue USPS box on a pole, nothing special. But in that moment, it felt like climbing a mountain. One breath at a time, I told myself. Just keep breathing. 20 feet, 30, 40. My chest was tight, but I was still moving. 50 feet, 60. The mailbox was getting closer. And then I was there. I pulled up alongside it, put the car in park, and sat there with the engine running, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I'd done it. I'd driven to the end of the block. It doesn't sound like much, does it? 100 feet, maybe less. Most people wouldn't even think twice about it. But for me, in that moment, it felt like I'd just conquered the world. I sat there for a long time, watching the sun rise over the neighborhood. The sky turned from pink to gold to pale blue, and the birds began their morning chorus. The sprinklers hissed. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. The world was waking up, and for the first time in 2 years, I felt like maybe I was waking up too. When I finally put the car back in drive and turned around to head home, I was crying again. But these tears were different. They weren't bitter or full of shame. They were relief, pure, shaking relief. I pulled back into my driveway, turned off the engine, and leaned my head against the steering wheel. My whole body was trembling, exhausted like I'd just run a marathon. But I was smiling. Actually smiling. "Thank you," I whispered into the quiet. "Thank you." The next morning, I did it again. This time I made it to the stop sign at the corner. The morning after that, I drove around the entire block. Slow, careful, hands still shaking, heart still racing, but moving. Each time, I whispered the same prayer. Just a little farther today. And each time, somehow, I made it. Marianne noticed. She came over one morning with coffee and found me sitting in the driveway, keys in hand, staring at the car. "You okay?" she asked, handing me a cup. I took it, wrapping my hands around the warmth. "I've been driving," I said quietly. "Not far. Just around the block in the mornings." She sat down on the porch step beside me, and I could see the tears welling up in her eyes. "Claire, I know it's not much." "It's everything," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "It's everything." We sat there together in the morning light, sipping our coffee, not saying much. But it felt good. It felt like maybe things were starting to shift. Like maybe the darkness was beginning to crack, just a little, and light was starting to seep through. But it wasn't easy. There were setbacks. Days when I couldn't even get in the car. Days when the fear came roaring back, louder and meaner than before, wrapping around my chest like a vice. Days when I sat in the driveway and cried because I couldn't move. One morning, a week into my slow progress, I made it all the way to the grocery store parking lot. It was only a mile from my house, but it felt like 100. By the time I pulled into a parking space, I was shaking so badly I could barely put the car in park. I sat there, staring at the entrance to the store, watching people walk in and out with their carts and their shopping lists, living their normal lives. And I wanted so badly to be one of them. To just get out of the car, walk inside, buy milk and bread like it was nothing, like it wasn't the hardest thing I'd ever done. But I couldn't. The fear was too big, too loud. I sat there for 20 minutes, fighting with myself, before I finally turned the car around and drove home. And when I pulled back into my driveway, I felt like I'd failed all over again. That night, Caleb asked me if I could take him to his friend's house the next day. It was a simple request. The kind of thing 12-year-olds ask their parents 100 times without thinking. But the address he gave me was on the other side of Highway 80. I felt my chest tighten immediately. "How about I ask Aunt Marianne to take you?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. His face fell. "Oh. Okay. I'm sorry, baby. It's okay, Mom." He said it the way he always did, with that resigned kindness that broke my heart. I get it. But he didn't get it. Not really. How could he? How could I explain that it wasn't about him? That it wasn't about not wanting to take him? That it was about the fact that Highway 80 was where nightmares lived, where headlights came out of nowhere and tires screamed and glass shattered? I couldn't. So I didn't. I called Marianne after Caleb went to bed. She answered on the second ring. "Can you take Caleb to his friend's house tomorrow?" I asked, my voice tight. There was a pause. Then, gently, "Claire, it's across Highway 80, isn't it?" "Yeah." Another pause. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, choosing her words carefully. "I'll take him," she said finally. "But honey, you can't avoid that road forever." I knew she was right. Highway 80 was the main road through Jackson. It cut right through the heart of the city. Avoiding it meant taking the long way around everywhere, adding 20 minutes to every trip, living in a smaller and smaller world. But I wasn't ready. Not yet. "I know," I whispered. I need more time." "I love you, sis. I love you too." That night, I sat on the back porch with a glass of sweet tea, listening to the crickets and the distant sound of traffic on the highway. The air was thick and warm, heavy with the promise of rain. The porch light buzzed above me, attracting moths that danced in circles, drawn to something they couldn't resist. I thought about those morning drives, about how each day I went a little farther, about the stop sign, the corner, the block, the parking lot, about how small steps were still steps, about how maybe healing wasn't a straight line, maybe it was messy and slow and full of setbacks, but maybe it was still happening. "Go a little farther today." The whisper came again, soft as the breeze moving through the magnolia trees. I closed my eyes and let it wash over me. "I'm trying," I whispered back into the darkness. "I'm really trying." The next morning, I drove Caleb to school. Not all the way. I still couldn't do that. But I made it 6 blocks instead of 2. And when I had to pull over, when the fear started creeping in, I didn't cry this time. I just breathed. In and out. Slow and steady. And I whispered the same words I'd been whispering every morning. "Just a little farther today." Caleb reached over and squeezed my hand. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. And when Marianne picked him up from the side of the road, when I watched them drive away, I didn't feel like a failure this time. I felt like someone who was fighting, someone who was trying, someone who hadn't given up. The quiet was still there. The darkness hadn't fully lifted. But somewhere in the stillness, something was beginning to change. I couldn't name it yet. Couldn't touch it. But I could feel it. Like the first light of dawn breaking through the night. Like the promise of something I'd forgotten how to hope for. Like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as lost as I thought. 2 weeks into my morning drives, I decided to do something I hadn't done in months. I was going to drive to the grocery store. Not just to the parking lot this time. I was going to park, get out, walk inside, and buy groceries like a normal person, like the woman I used to be. It was a Thursday afternoon. The sun was high and bright, the kind of Mississippi heat that makes the air shimmer above the pavement. Caleb was at school, Marianne was at work. It was just me in my car and the list I'd written on the back of an envelope. Milk, bread, eggs, coffee. Simple things. Normal things. I could do this. I backed out of the driveway slowly, my hands steady on the wheel. The route to the grocery store was one I'd taken 1,000 times before the accident. Down Capitol Street, left on Fortification, right into the parking lot. 5 minutes. Maybe 7 if I hit the lights wrong. I could do this. The first few blocks went smoothly. My heart was beating fast, but it wasn't racing. My hands were tight on the wheel, but they weren't shaking. I focused on my breathing, the way I'd been practicing every morning. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Steady, controlled. Just keep moving forward. I made it to Fortification Street and turned left. The grocery store was just ahead, maybe half a mile. I could see the sign rising above the trees, bright red letters against the blue sky. Almost there. And then I heard it. A siren. It started distant, then grew louder. An ambulance, coming fast from behind me. I checked my rearview mirror and saw the flashing lights, red and white, cutting through the bright afternoon. My chest immediately tightened. My hands went slick with sweat. It's okay, I told myself. Just pull over. Let it pass. I eased the car toward the shoulder, my heart starting to hammer now. The ambulance screamed past me, so close I could feel the rush of wind rock my car. And suddenly, I was back there. 2 years ago, that night. The sirens, the lights, the smell of gasoline and blood and fear. My breath caught in my throat. The world started to tunnel, everything going dark at the edges. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The steering wheel felt like it was burning under my hands. I pulled into the grocery store parking lot and jerked the car into the first space I saw, my whole body trembling. I threw it into park and sat there, gasping, my vision blurry with tears. No, not now. I was doing so well. No, I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for the trembling to slow, long enough for my breathing to even out, at least a little. Long enough to feel the shame creeping in, hot and familiar, telling me I was foolish to think I could do this, foolish to think I'd ever be normal again. I reached for the radio, desperate for something to ground me, something to pull me out of my own head. My hand was shaking so badly, it took 3 tries to turn the dial. Static A commercial. A pop song I didn't recognize. And then, a voice. Deep, warm, southern. A preacher, mid-sermon, his words rolling out like thunder and honey. Because God did not give you a spirit of fear, he was saying, his voice rising with conviction. Y'all hear me? God did not give you a spirit of fear. 2 Timothy, chapter 1, verse 7. Let me read it to you from the King James. My hand froze on the dial. For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. The words hit me like a physical thing, like a hand reaching through the radio and gripping my heart. I sat there, frozen, tears streaming down my face as the preacher continued. Not fear, but power. Not anxiety, but love. Not chaos, but a sound mind. That's what God gave you. That's what he's been offering you all along. And whatever spirit of fear you've been carrying around, whatever weight you've been dragging through your days, that didn't come from him. I pulled the keys out of the ignition with trembling hands. The radio died, but the words kept echoing in my head, over and over, like they'd been burned into my mind. God hath not given us the spirit of fear. I pressed my hands over my face and sobbed. Not the quiet, controlled kind of crying I'd been doing for 2 years. The loud, ugly, desperate kind. The kind that comes from somewhere so deep, you didn't even know it was there. Then what have I been carrying all this time? I whispered into my hands, my voice breaking. If it didn't come from you, then what is this? The parking lot was busy around me. People pushing carts, loading groceries, living their normal lives. No one looked at the woman crying in her car. Or if they did, They looked away quickly, uncomfortable with someone else's pain. But I didn't care. I couldn't care, because something was breaking open inside me. Something that had been locked tight for 2 years was finally starting to crack. I thought about all the mornings I'd sat in my driveway, too afraid to start the engine. All the times I'd pulled over on the side of the road, gasping for air, convinced I was dying. All the moments I'd missed because fear told me I couldn't, shouldn't, wouldn't survive. The accident, the flashbacks, the nightmares. The way my body remembered what my mind tried to forget. All of it was real. The trauma was real. The pain was real. But the voice that told me I'd always be this way, that I'd never be free, that fear was all I had left. That voice wasn't from God. God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. I said it out loud, my voice shaking, then again, louder, and again. Like I was trying to convince myself it was true. Like I was fighting against every lie fear had ever whispered in my ear. For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power, and of love, and of a sound mind. Power. When had I last felt powerful? When had I last made a decision that wasn't controlled by fear? Love. When had I last loved myself enough to believe I deserved to be free? A sound mind. When had my mind last been sound, instead of a prison of worst-case scenarios and paralyzing what-ifs? I opened my car door and stepped out into the heat. My legs were shaky, but they held me. The sun was bright and warm on my face. The smell of hot asphalt and someone's car air freshener drifted through the air. Normal. Everything was so beautifully, painfully normal. I looked at the grocery store entrance. The automatic doors were sliding open and closed as people walked through. Inside, I could see the bright lights, the colorful signs, the aisles of food. It was just a grocery store. Nothing scary, nothing dangerous. But 2 years of fear had convinced me that everywhere was dangerous. That every moment could be the moment when everything fell apart again. God hath not given us the spirit of fear. I took a step forward, then another. My heart was pounding, but I kept walking. Past the rows of parked cars, past the shopping cart corral, toward the entrance. The automatic doors slid open as I approached, and I stepped inside. Cold air hit my face. The sound of a radio playing overhead, shopping carts rattling, people talking. It was overwhelming, too much, too loud. But I was inside. I grabbed a cart, more to hold on to than because I needed it, and started walking. Slowly, one foot in front of the other, down the produce aisle. The bright colors of apples and oranges and lettuce blurred through my tears, but I kept moving. Power, love, a sound mind. A woman passed me with her cart, gave me a quick smile. "Afternoon," she said. "Afternoon," I managed to say back, my voice hoarse. I made it to the dairy section, opened the cooler door, and grabbed a gallon of milk. The cold glass felt real and solid in my hands. I put it in my cart. Bread, eggs, coffee. I moved through the store like I was learning to walk for the first time. Everything felt new and strange and terrifying, and somehow impossibly okay. By the time I got to the checkout line, I was crying again. Not from fear this time, but from something else. Something I couldn't quite name. Relief, maybe, or gratitude, or the overwhelming realization that I'd just done something I thought I'd never do again. The cashier, a young woman with kind eyes and long braids, looked up as I approached. She saw my face, saw the tears, and her expression softened. "You all right, honey?" she asked gently. I nodded, wiping my face with the back of my hand. "Yeah, I'm okay. It's been a hard day." "I hear that," she said, and started scanning my items. "But you're here. That's something. You're here. That's something." Such simple words, but they hit me like a revelation. I was here. I'd made it. I'd driven to the store, walked inside, bought groceries. Things that used to be nothing were now everything. And maybe that was okay. Maybe healing didn't look like getting back to exactly who I used to be. Maybe it looked like learning to be someone new. Someone who'd been broken but was choosing, slowly, painfully, bravely, to be put back together. I paid for my groceries and walked back out into the parking lot, the plastic bags heavy in my hands. The sun was still bright, the air still thick and warm. My car was where I'd left it, waiting for me. I loaded the bags into the trunk and stood there for a moment, keys in hand, looking at the driver's side door. God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. I said it one more time, whispered it like a prayer, like a promise. And then I heard it again. That voice, softer than before, gentler, but unmistakable. Power, love, a sound mind. This is what I have given you. This is what's always been yours. I got in the car and started the engine. My hands weren't shaking anymore. Or maybe they were, just a little, but it didn't matter. I was driving. I was moving. I was choosing to move forward, even when everything in me wanted to stay frozen. I pulled out of the parking space and headed toward the exit. And that's when I saw it. The sign for Highway 80. My chest tightened immediately. My hands went slick on the wheel. Every instinct I had screamed at me to turn around, to take the long way home, to avoid that road like I'd been avoiding it for 2 years. But the words were still there, echoing in my mind. God hath not given us the spirit of fear. I could feel my heart racing, could feel the fear creeping up my throat, trying to choke me. The memories were there, right at the edge of my consciousness. The headlights, the impact, the scream. But underneath all of that, quieter but stronger, was something else. A whisper I'd been hearing for weeks now, ever since that night I'd prayed in my driveway. You are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to become. I sat at the stop sign at the edge of the parking lot, my turn signal clicking, pointing toward Highway 80. I could turn right instead, take the back roads, add 20 minutes to my drive, stay safe in my small, controlled world, or I could turn left. My hands were trembling on the wheel. Tears were streaming down my face. My breath was coming in short, shallow gasps. I can't do this, I whispered. I can't. You can. Because I am with you. And I have not given you the spirit of fear. It wasn't my voice. It wasn't my courage. It was something bigger than me. Something I'd been running from and running toward all at the same time. I turned left. Highway 80 stretched out in front of me. 4 lanes of traffic moving fast under the afternoon sun. My heart was hammering so hard, I thought it might break through my chest. Every car that passed felt like a threat. Every shadow looked like danger. But I kept driving. 30 miles an hour, 35, 40. The speed limit was 55, and cars were flying past me, but I didn't care. I was on the highway. I was doing it. God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. I said it out loud, over and over, like a mantra, like a lifeline. Power, love, a sound mind. Power, love, a sound mind. A mile passed. Then 2. My exit was coming up. The one that would take me back toward my neighborhood, back toward home. I put on my turn signal and merged right, my whole body shaking but my hands steady on the wheel. I took the exit and pulled over into the parking lot of a church. First Baptist, the sign said. I put the car in park and sat there, engine running, tears pouring down my face. I'd done it. I'd driven on Highway 80, the road I'd been avoiding for 2 years, the road where my nightmares lived. And I'd survived. Not just survived. I'd driven. I'd chosen. I'd fought against every instinct that told me I couldn't, and I'd done it anyway. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes, and I felt it wash over me. Not relief, not victory, just peace. Deep, bone-tired, beautiful peace. Faith spoke louder. The words came to me like a gift, like the final piece of a puzzle I'd been trying to solve for 2 years. Fear had been shouting at me for so long, screaming in my ear, telling me I was broken, telling me I'd never be whole again, telling me the world was dangerous and I'd never be safe. But today, for the first time, faith spoke louder. I sat in that church parking lot until the sun started to sink low on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. And when I finally drove home, taking side streets this time because I'd done enough for one day, I felt different. Not healed, not fixed, not back to the person I used to be, but different, stronger. Like something inside me had shifted, and I couldn't go back to who I was before. God hadn't given me the spirit of fear. He'd given me power and love and a sound mind. And for the first time in 2 years, I believed it might actually be true. The morning after I drove on Highway 80, I woke up different. Not healed, I want to be clear about that. The fear hadn't vanished overnight like some miracle in a storybook. But something had shifted. Something deep and fundamental. Like a bone that had been broken and was finally starting to knit back together. I lay in bed for a moment, watching the early light filter through the curtains, listening to the birds singing their morning songs. And I realized I wasn't afraid of the day ahead. Not completely, anyway. For the first time in 2 years, I woke up without that immediate weight of dread pressing down on my chest. I got up and made coffee, the same ritual I'd done 1,000 times before. But this morning, I stood at the kitchen window and actually saw the world outside. The way the dew sparkled on the grass, the way Mrs. Henderson was already out watering her flowers, humming to herself. The way the sun was just starting to burn off the morning mist, turning everything soft and golden. Jackson in the early morning has always been beautiful. I'd just forgotten how to see it. Caleb came into the kitchen, still in his pajamas, his hair sticking up in every direction. He stopped when he saw me, like he was trying to figure out if something was different. "Morning, Mom," he said carefully. "Morning, sweetheart." I poured him a glass of orange juice and smiled. A real smile, not the forced kind I'd been giving him for months. "You want pancakes?" His eyes widened. "Really?" It hit me then how long it had been since I'd made breakfast, since I'd done anything that felt normal and maternal and simple. Marianne had been bringing groceries. We'd been eating a lot of cereal and takeout. I'd been so consumed by just surviving that I'd forgotten how to live. "Really?" I said. "Blueberry or chocolate chip?" "Both?" I laughed, actually laughed. And it felt strange and wonderful and a little bit like coming home. "Both it is." After I dropped Caleb off at school, drove him all the way there, no stopping, no pulling over, I found myself driving without a destination. Just driving. Windows down, radio playing low, the warm morning air rushing through the car. I wasn't going anywhere in particular. I was just going. I turned down streets I hadn't been on in years. Past the elementary school where Caleb went to kindergarten. Past the park where we used to feed the ducks on Sunday afternoons. Past the little coffee shop on State Street where I used to meet my friends before the accident, back when I was someone who met friends for coffee without having to psych herself up for days first. Maybe I could do that again. Maybe not today, but someday. I ended up at the reservoir, the Ross Barnett Reservoir on the edge of Jackson, where the water spreads out wide and blue under the Mississippi sky. I parked in the small lot near the overlook and got out, the sun warm on my face. There were a few other people there. A man fishing off the small pier. A woman jogging with her dog. A couple sitting on a bench, holding hands, watching the water. I walked to the railing and looked out over the reservoir. The water was calm today, barely a ripple on the surface. It stretched out as far as I could see, reflecting the sky like a mirror. For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power, and of love, and of a sound mind. The words came back to me, and this time they didn't make me cry. They made me smile. Power. I'd felt it yesterday when I chose to turn left onto Highway 80, when I chose to keep driving even when everything in me screamed to stop. Love? I'd felt it in Caleb's eyes this morning when I made him pancakes, in Marianne's voice when she called last night and I told her what I'd done, in my own heart when I looked in the mirror and saw someone who was fighting, not giving up. A sound mind. Maybe I didn't have that yet. Not completely. But I was getting there. One day, one drive, one choice at a time. I stayed at the reservoir for over an hour, just watching the water, feeling the sun, breathing the air. And for the first time in 2 years, I wasn't thinking about the accident. Wasn't replaying it in my mind. Wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was just present, here, now, alive. When I finally got back in my car and headed home, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Something I'd almost forgotten the name for. Hope. 3 days later, the storm came. I'd been driving more, every day, a little farther. I'd made it to the library, to the post office, to Caleb's school and back without stopping. I'd even driven on Highway 80 again, twice, and each time it got a little easier. Not easy, but easier. That afternoon, the sky had been darkening all day. The air was thick and heavy with that particular electricity that comes before a southern thunderstorm, the kind that rolls in fast and hard, turning the world gray and violent in a matter of minutes. I was driving home from the grocery store, my second successful trip in a week, when the first drops of rain hit my windshield. My whole body tensed immediately. My hands tightened on the wheel. Because it had been raining that night, 2 years ago. The road had been wet and slick, and the headlights had come out of nowhere, too fast to avoid. The rain came harder, faster. Within seconds, it was a downpour, pounding against the car so hard I could barely see the road in front of me. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Lightning flashed across the sky. My heart started racing. My breath came short and shallow. Every instinct I had screamed at me to pull over, to stop, to wait it out. But I was on Highway 80. 2 lanes in each direction, traffic moving fast around me despite the rain. There was nowhere to pull over, nowhere to hide. I had to keep driving. The windshield wipers were on full speed, but they could barely keep up. The world outside was a blur of gray and water. I could see the taillights of the car in front of me, 2 red eyes in the storm. But everything else was just rain. My hands were white-knuckled on the wheel. My whole body was shaking. I could feel the panic rising in my throat, choking me, telling me I was going to crash, that this was it, that history was about to repeat itself. No, I whispered. No, not this time. But the fear was so loud, louder than the thunder, louder than the rain hammering on the roof of the car. And then, from somewhere deep inside me, I started to sing. I don't know why. It wasn't something I planned. It just came out. It is well. With my soul. My voice was shaky and thin, barely audible over the storm. But I kept going. It is well. It is well. With my soul. It was an old hymn, one my grandmother used to sing in church when I was little. I hadn't thought about it in years. But somehow, in that moment, it was the only thing that felt true. The rain kept falling. The thunder kept rolling. Lightning split the sky open, so bright it lit up the inside of my car. But I kept singing. When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll. And then I heard it. That voice, the one I'd been hearing for weeks now. Gentle, sure, unmistakable. I am in this storm with you. Tears mixed with the rain, streaking down the windshield. But I wasn't crying from fear anymore. I was crying from something else, something bigger. Whatever my lot thou hast taught me to say, it is well. It is well with my soul. I sang it louder this time, stronger, like I was singing against the storm, like I was declaring something true even when everything around me felt chaotic and terrifying. I am in this storm with you, and you are not alone. The storm started to break. Slowly at first. The rain lightened from a downpour to a steady fall. The thunder grew more distant, and then, impossibly, beautifully, a crack of sunlight broke through the clouds. It hit my windshield like a spotlight, golden and warm, cutting through the gray. And in that light, I saw a rainbow forming in the distance, arching over the highway like a promise. I started laughing. I couldn't help it. tears streaming down my face, hands still shaking on the wheel. But laughing. Actually laughing. Because I'd done it. I'd driven through the storm, through the rain and the thunder and the fear. And I'd survived. Not just survived, I'd sung. I took my exit and pulled into the parking lot of a small church, not First Baptist this time, but a little white chapel I'd never noticed before. The rain had stopped completely now, and the sun was breaking through the clouds in long golden beams, making everything sparkle. I got out of the car and stood in the wet parking lot, my shoes splashing in puddles, my face turned up to the sky. The air smelled like rain and earth, and that particular freshness that only comes after a storm has passed. Faith spoke louder. The words came to me again, but this time they felt different. Not like a realization, like a celebration. Fear had been there in that storm. It had screamed at me, tried to paralyze me, tried to convince me I was going to die. But I'd driven through it anyway. I'd chosen faith over fear. I'd chosen to keep moving even when everything in me wanted to stop. And I'd made it to the other side. That evening, I cooked dinner for the first time in months. Nothing fancy, just spaghetti and garlic bread. But Caleb looked at me like I'd given him the world. "This is really good, Mom," he said around a mouthful of pasta. "Thank you, baby." Marianne came over after dinner, and we sat on the back porch with sweet tea, listening to the crickets and watching the fireflies blink in the darkness. "You seem different," she said after a while. "I feel different," I admitted. "What changed?" I thought about it for a long moment, about the radio preacher and the scripture verse, about driving on Highway 80, about the storm and the singing and the rainbow. "I realized something," I said slowly. "Fear's been driving my life for 2 years, making all my decisions, telling me what I could and couldn't do. But fear didn't come from God. That verse, 'God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind.' It made me realize I've been carrying something that was never mine to carry." Marianne reached over and squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you, sis." "I'm proud of me too," I said, and I meant it. We sat there in comfortable silence, rocking slowly on the porch swing, the warm night air wrapping around us like a blanket. And I felt it settling deep in my bones, that peace I'd been chasing for so long. Not the absence of fear, but the presence of something stronger. Faith. That night, after Marianne went home and Caleb was asleep, I stood in my driveway looking at my car. The same car I'd been afraid of for 2 years. The same car that had felt like a prison. But it didn't look like that anymore. It just looked like a car, a tool, a way to get from one place to another. I walked over and ran my hand along the hood, still warm from the day's driving. And I said a prayer, not a desperate one this time, but a grateful one. "Thank you for power. Thank you for love. Thank you for a sound mind. Thank you for teaching me that fear doesn't have to win." The night was quiet except for the cicadas and the distant sound of a train whistle somewhere across town. The stars were out, bright and clear in the Mississippi sky. I looked up at them and smiled. Tomorrow I'd drive again, and the day after that, and the day after that. Some days would be harder than others. Some days the fear would come back, loud and insistent. But I knew now that it didn't have to control me. Because God hadn't given me the spirit of fear. He'd given me something better. He'd given me faith. At an kind. Faith spoke louder. 3 Sundays after the storm, I found myself sitting in the parking lot of Cornerstone Baptist Church on North State Street. The same church I'd attended before the accident. The same church I'd stopped going to because I couldn't drive there. Because the parking lot was too crowded. Because there were too many people. Because fear told me it wasn't safe. But today, I was here. The service had already started. I could hear the music drifting out through the open doors, voices raised in worship, the old organ pumping out hymns that had been sung in this building for over 100 years. I sat in my car with the windows down, listening, feeling my heart beating steady and strong in my chest. I wasn't afraid. Not today. I'd gotten a call from Pastor Williams earlier in the week. Mary Ann had told him about what I'd been going through, about the progress I'd been making. He'd asked if I'd be willing to share my testimony at the Sunday service, to tell the congregation what God had done in my life. My first instinct had been to say no, to hide, to keep my struggle private, the way I'd been doing for 2 years. But then I remembered that verse, that beautiful, life-changing verse. For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. And I heard myself saying yes. I got out of the car and walked toward the church. The morning was already warm, that thick Mississippi heat settling in early. The church doors were propped open, and I could see people inside, faces I recognized, faces I'd missed. Mrs. Patterson with her church hat, the Johnson family filling up an entire pew, young couples with babies, teenagers trying to look interested, my people, my community. The ones who'd probably been praying for me even when I didn't know it. I stepped through the doors, and the music washed over me. They were singing, "Amazing Grace." How sweet the sound. I slipped into a back pew next to Mary Ann, who reached over and squeezed my hand so tight I thought she might break my fingers. Caleb was sitting next to her, dressed in his Sunday best, his hair actually combed for once. When he saw me, his whole face lit up. "You came," he whispered. "I came," I whispered back, and kissed the top of his head. The service moved through its familiar rhythms, the hymns, the offering, the scripture reading. I sat there, my hands folded in my lap, my heart surprisingly calm. When Pastor Williams stood up to give the sermon, he caught my eye and gave me a small nod. "Before I begin today," he said, his deep voice carrying through the sanctuary, "I want to invite someone special to come up and share a word with us. Many of you know Claire Mitchell. She's been part of this church family for years, and she has a testimony that I believe will speak to every single person in this room." He looked at me. The whole congregation turned to look at me. And for just a second, just one brief, flickering second, the fear tried to come back, tried to tell me to stay seated, to stay silent, to stay hidden. But then I heard it, that whisper, gentle and sure. Tell them what I've done." I stood up. My legs felt shaky, but they held me. I walked down the aisle, past the Pattersons and the Johnsons and all the faces I'd known for years, and climbed the 3 steps to the pulpit. Pastor Williams stepped aside, giving me the space, the microphone, the moment. I looked out at the congregation, and suddenly they weren't strangers. They were witnesses. They were family. They were people who had their own fears, their own struggles, their own storms they were trying to survive. Maybe some of them needed to hear this as much as I needed to say it. "Good morning," I said, and my voice came out stronger than I expected. "Thank you, Pastor Williams. And thank you all for being here today. For being the kind of community that holds people up when they can't stand on their own." I took a deep breath. 2 years ago, I was in a car accident. Some of you know about it. It was bad. I survived. But something inside me broke that night. Something I didn't know how to fix. The church was completely silent. Even the babies had stopped fussing. I developed this fear. This paralyzing, overwhelming fear of driving. And it didn't matter that I knew, logically, that I was safe. My body remembered what my mind tried to forget. And slowly, that fear took over my whole life. I couldn't drive my son to school. I couldn't go to the grocery store. I couldn't even make it to church. I saw heads nodding, saw understanding in people's eyes, saw a woman in the third row wiping tears from her cheeks. For 2 years, I let that fear drive my life. And I don't mean that as a metaphor. I mean it literally. Fear was in the driver's seat, and I was just along for the ride, going wherever it took me. And it took me to some dark places. Places of shame and guilt and hopelessness. My voice cracked, but I kept going. I missed my son's baseball games. I watched my sister take over responsibilities that should have been mine. I became someone I didn't recognize, someone small and afraid and trapped. I paused, looking out at all those faces. But then something happened. I was sitting in a parking lot one day, having just pulled over because I couldn't handle the sound of a siren. I turned on the radio, desperate for anything to distract me from my own panic. And a preacher came on. I don't even know who he was or what station I was listening to. But he started reading from 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7. I pulled my Bible from under my arm, the one I'd brought from home, worn and marked and loved, and opened it to the page I'd bookmarked. Let me read it to you. From the King James Version, because that's the translation I heard that day. And these are the exact words that changed my life. My hands were trembling, but my voice was steady. For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. I looked up from the Bible, and I saw people leaning forward, listening. Really listening. God hath not given us the spirit of fear, I repeated. When I heard those words, something broke open inside me. Because I realized the fear I'd been carrying around, the fear that was controlling my life, making my decisions, stealing my joy, that didn't come from God. I pressed my hand to my chest. The trauma was real. The pain was real. The accident happened, and the consequences were real. But the voice that told me I'd never be free, the voice that told me I'd always be this way, that I was broken beyond repair, that voice was a liar. God didn't give me fear. He gave me power. Power to make choices, even when I'm scared. Power to take one small step, and then another, and then another. He gave me love. Love for my son that was stronger than my fear of what might happen. Love for this life he's given me, even when it's hard. And he gave me a sound mind, not a perfect mind, not a mind that never struggles or doubts or gets afraid, but a sound mind, a mind capable of truth and courage and faith. The tears were coming now, but I didn't try to stop them. It didn't happen overnight. Healing never does. I started small, driving to the end of my block, then around the neighborhood, then to the store. And every morning, I'd hear this whisper in my heart. Go a little farther today. Just a little farther. Not all the way to healed, not all the way to fearless, just a little farther than yesterday. And then one day, I had to drive on Highway 80, the same highway where the accident happened. The road I'd been avoiding for 2 years because it was where all my nightmares lived. And I had a choice. Turn right and take the safe route home, or turn left and face the thing I was most afraid of. I looked out at the congregation, and I saw my sister crying, saw my son watching me with pride in his eyes. I turned left, and I drove on that highway. And a few days later, I drove through a thunderstorm on that same road. And you know what I did? I sang. I sang, "It is well with my soul," and I meant it. Because even in the middle of the storm, even when I was terrified, I knew I wasn't alone. God was in that storm with me. He's been in every storm with me. Fear controlled my life for 2 years, I said, my voice strong and clear. It told me where I could go and what I could do and who I could be. It made me small. It made me hide. It stole so much from me. I paused, looking out at every face in that sanctuary. But faith spoke louder. The words hung in the air, and I saw people nodding, crying, whispering amen under their breath. Faith spoke louder than the fear. Faith said, "You are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to become." Faith said, "God has not given you the spirit of fear, but of power and love and a sound mind." Faith said, "Take one more step. Go a little farther. You can do this." I closed my Bible and held it against my heart. I'm not standing here today to tell you I'm healed. I'm not here to say I never get afraid anymore, because I do. Some days are still hard. Some days I still have to pull over and breathe and remind myself of that verse. But I'm standing here to tell you that fear doesn't have to drive your life. Whatever fear you're carrying, fear of failure, fear of loss, fear of being hurt, fear of trying again, it didn't come from God. God gave you power. Power to choose, power to move, power to fight. God gave you love. Love that casts out fear. Love that holds you up when you can't stand on your own. God gave you a sound mind. A mind capable of truth, capable of courage, capable of faith. And if He gave you those things, then fear doesn't get the final word. Faith does. I stepped back from the microphone, and for a moment, there was complete silence. And then the church erupted. Not in polite applause, but in the kind of worship that comes from deep recognition. People standing, crying, shouting, "Amen," and "Glory," and "Thank you, Jesus." Hands lifted in praise, tears streaming down faces. Pastor Williams came and put his hand on my shoulder, his own eyes wet with tears. "Thank you, sister," he said quietly. I walked down from the pulpit and back to my pew, and Caleb threw his arms around me. Mary Ann pulled me into a tight hug. People I hadn't spoken to in 2 years reached out to touch my hand, to whisper, "Thank you," to tell me their own stories of fear and faith. And I realized something beautiful. This testimony wasn't just mine. It belonged to anyone who'd ever been trapped by fear. Anyone who'd ever felt like they'd never be free. Anyone who needed to hear that faith could speak louder. After the service, I stood in the parking lot talking to people for nearly an hour. sharing stories, praying together, crying and laughing and feeling like I'd come home to a part of myself I'd thought was lost forever. When the crowd finally thinned, I walked back to my car with Caleb and Marianne. The sun was high and hot, the kind of Mississippi afternoon that makes the air shimmer. But it felt good. Alive. "I'm proud of you, Mom," Caleb said as we stood by my car. "I'm proud of me too, baby." Marianne hugged me one more time. "You know what this means, right? You're going to have people calling you, asking you to share this story, asking for help." "Good," I said. "Let them call. If my story can help one person take one step toward freedom, then every hard moment was worth it." I drove home alone that afternoon, taking the long way through Jackson, past the reservoir where I'd stood watching the water, past the grocery store where I'd heard that verse for the first time, past the baseball field where I'd cried on the empty bleachers. All the places where fear had tried to win, all the places where faith spoke louder. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for a moment with the engine running, my hands resting gently on the steering wheel. And I thought about that woman who had sat in this same spot 2 years ago, too afraid to start the engine, too afraid to move, too afraid to live. She felt like a stranger now, but not in a bad way, in the way that healing makes strangers of who we used to be. I turned off the car and looked up at my house. The home I'd barely left for 2 years, and I felt something settle deep in my bones. Not the absence of fear, but the presence of peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you fought a battle and won. Not perfectly, not easily, but truly. Faith spoke louder. Purpose echo. Fear used to drive my life. It sat in the front seat and made every decision, chose every route, controlled every moment. It told me I was broken. It told me I'd never be whole. It told me the world was dangerous and I'd never be safe again. But God said something different. He said, "I have not given you the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind." And when I finally heard him, really heard him, everything changed. Not overnight, not all at once, but slowly, steadily, one brave choice at a time. The fear is still there sometimes. It probably always will be. Trauma leaves scars that don't fully fade. But those scars don't define me anymore. They're just proof that I survived. Proof that I'm still here. Proof that faith spoke louder. If you're sitting in your car right now, afraid to start the engine, start it anyway. If you're standing at the edge of something that terrifies you, take one step anyway. If fear has been driving your life and you're exhausted from going places you never wanted to go, take the wheel back. One hand at a time, one breath at a time, one choice at a time. Because God didn't give you the spirit of fear. He gave you power and love and a sound mind. And when the storm comes, and it will come, you can sing through it. You can drive through it. You can survive it. Because faith speaks louder. Benediction. Heavenly Father, we come before you tonight with hearts that have known fear. We have carried weights that were never ours to carry. We have listened to voices that did not come from you. But tonight, Lord, we choose to listen to your voice instead. You have given us power. Power to choose courage over comfort. Power to take one more step when we want to give up. Power to turn the wheel toward the things that scare us. You have given us love. love that casts out fear, love that holds us steady in the storm, love that reminds us we are not alone, not now, not ever. You have given us a sound mind, a mind capable of truth, a mind capable of faith, a mind that can say no to fear and yes to the life you have called us to live. Let courage rise in every heart that hears this story. Let faith speak louder than whatever fear has been shouting. Let every person who feels trapped know that you are the God who sets captives free. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Wonderhorn. May this peace find you tonight. Peace be with you tonight.